If you were a woman in Renaissance Florence, your first pregnancy had a 1 in 5 chance of killing you. Your husband was, on average, 15 years older. And the city had a public office, staffed by full-time investigators, whose only job was to monitor what you wore in the street. This is the part of the Renaissance the museum tours leave out. They told you the Renaissance was a rebirth. New ideas. New art, new freedom. That story was written by men. In Florence, between roughly 1400 and 1550, a woman of any class lived inside a system designed to keep her invisible. Her father owned her until her wedding day. Her husband owned her after. If she outlived him, his sons inherited her. She was, in the eyes of Florentine law, a piece of household property that could speak. She could not vote. She could not hold office. She could not testify in most courts. She could not sign her own contracts. She could not leave her own home without permission. In many parishes, she could not even attend the funeral of her own parents if her husband forbade it. And here is the part that breaks people. None of this was considered cruelty. It was considered protection. Florentine girls were married young. The average bride was 16. Her groom was 31. That gap was not romantic. It was financial. A Florentine man waited to marry until he had the money to do it. A Florentine girl was married the moment her father had the money to send her away. That money had a name. The dowry. By the late 1400s, the cost of marrying off a daughter in Florence had risen so high that the city created a public bank just to handle it. The Monte del Dote. Fathers would deposit money the day a girl was born and pray it grew fast enough by the time she turned 15. If it did not, she did not marry. And if she did not marry, she had 2 options. She went into a convent. Or she stayed home, unmarried, for the rest of her life, sleeping in the same room she was born in, eating at the edge of her brother's table, watching her nieces grow up calling her aunt. The dowry was so central to a woman's worth that her own legal identity was tied to it. If her husband died, she got the dowry back. If she ran away, she lost it. If she was raped, the question Florentine courts asked was not whether she had been harmed. It was whether her dowry value had been damaged. Half of the noble daughters of Florence never married at all. By 1552, surviving tax records show that roughly 1 in 2 upper-class Florentine women lived inside a convent. Most of them did not choose it. The math was simple. A noble family could afford 1 or 2 real dowries. Any daughter beyond that was a financial loss. So the family did the only thing the law allowed. They bought her a place in a convent instead. The cost was a fraction of a marriage dowry. The result was permanent. Girls were sent in as young as 9. They took their first vows at 12. Final vows at 16. After that, the door closed for life. Some of these women became scholars. Some became composers. Some wrote letters that survive today, full of rage and longing and prayer. One nun, Archangela Tarabotti, called the convent system what it actually was: a prison. She wrote that fathers were tossing their daughters into holy graves while they were still alive. Her book was banned. Her name was scrubbed from records. It took 400 years for historians to find her again. If you did marry, your body became a public asset. Florence, like the rest of Renaissance Italy, was obsessed with one number: the birth rate. Plague had gutted the city in the 1300s. War, famine, and disease kept gutting it through the 1400s. The state needed babies. And the only place babies came from was you. Married women were expected to be pregnant or nursing for nearly all of their fertile years. The average Florentine wife who survived to 40 had been pregnant between 8 and 12 times. Maybe half of those pregnancies produced a child who lived past age 5. Childbirth itself was the leading cause of death for women under 30. There were no doctors in the room. Doctors were men, and men were not allowed to see a laboring woman's body. There were midwives, and there was prayer, and there was a candle that the family lit when things began to go wrong. When the candle burned out, the priest was already on his way. If the mother died, the baby was usually fine. If the baby died, the mother was usually blamed. Florentine sermons of the period openly suggested that stillbirths were God's punishment for a wife's hidden sins. In 1415, the city of Florence created an office. Its name translated, roughly, to the Office of Decency. Its job was to police what women wore. Inspectors walked the streets with notebooks. They measured sleeve lengths. They counted pearls. They flagged necklines. They wrote down the names of any woman whose dress was too bright, too tight, too long, too embroidered, or too foreign. Fines were issued. Husbands paid them. The fines went into the city treasury. This was not vanity policing. It was something stranger. Florentine men had decided that female display was a form of social disorder. A woman in too much silk was a threat to the moral fabric of the Republic. So the Republic measured her sleeves. The records survive. You can read them today in the Florentine archives. Page after page of women's names, women's fabrics, women's accessories, all logged by men who believed they were saving the city from something. Some women refused. Alessandra Strozzi, widowed at 33 with 7 children, ran her family's business for 40 years and wrote letters so sharp they are still studied in Italian classrooms. She negotiated her sons' marriages. She bought property. She survived political exile. She did all of it without ever being legally allowed to sign her own name on a contract. Caterina Sforza, raised in the Florentine sphere, defended her own fortress against an invading army while pregnant. When the enemy threatened to kill her captured children unless she surrendered, she stood on the battlements and, according to the chronicles, gestured at her own body and shouted that she had the means to make more. Lucrezia Tornabuoni wrote religious poetry that the Medici read aloud at court, advised her son Lorenzo on banking and politics, and quietly ran half the patronage decisions of Florence's golden age. Her name appears in almost no history books written before 1980. These women existed. They left letters. They left ledgers. They left poems. And for 500 years, the men writing the history of the Renaissance left them out. Walk through the Uffizi Gallery today and you will see them. The Renaissance women. Pale, smooth, draped in silk, eyes half lowered, hands folded in their laps. Those paintings were commissioned by their husbands or their fathers. The women were posed. The smiles, the few of them, were directed. The clothes were chosen to advertise the family's wealth, not the woman's taste. In many of the most famous portraits, we do not even know the subject's real name. She is listed as the wife of, or the daughter of, or simply a Florentine lady. Behind those paintings was a real person. She had a body that was not hers, a name that was not hers, a lifespan that averaged less than 40 years, and a public office somewhere in the city writing down what she wore. The Renaissance gave us perspective and anatomy and the dome of the cathedral. It also gave us this. A century of brilliant art produced inside a system that treated half its population as a managed resource. History remembers the Medici. It remembers Michelangelo. It remembers the bankers and the painters and the popes. It tries very hard to forget the women who lived underneath all of it. They were there. They wrote. They worked. They fought. They died young. And the records of their lives are sitting in the same Florentine archives that produced the masterpieces, waiting for anyone willing to look. Most people never do.